Can people see my screen there?
I cannot.
No. Better try again then. There it is.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Whoa, look at that beautiful logo.
Yeah. Who did that good work, Micah? You did that. That's your logo.
Actually, we had it. Let's see. We have a couple different versions of it. This version of it was actually created by my little brother, John Mark. Some of you met
very good.
him. Yeah.
All right. So what are we talking about? This is something that I've been thinking about over the last probably 12 to 18 months, and it all sort of came together recently for me. Just want to run through some ideas here, and I hope it's an intriguing topic. And we'll start with, I guess, a bit of definition. What does the word archetype mean when you hear it? What does it mean to you? What do you think?
Carl Jung kind of sense.
Yep.
Same. I also think of Greek mythology.
Yep.
And like literature in general.
I don't know that I have a good feeling about what it really means, but it does show up in a lot of like early Christian writing, right? The archetype, and by that they're talking about Christ. And so I think that's interesting.
Yeah. Oh, also, does it? What's the difference between an archetype and a myth, for example?
I think the archetype is like the idea behind the myth, like the suffering savior archetype. You find that in a lot of traditions.
Yeah, absolutely. To my way of thinking, like myths emerge from archetypes. They're things, these archetypes of sort of traveling along with us. So, examples. I think what the best way of defining an archetype is it's a universal, ancient, symbolic idea that we immediately recognize when we see it. We see it in life, literature, movies, anywhere else. These sorts of ideas, these people that you meet in whatever story that you're living in or finding. We see conflicted heroes, conflicted anti-heroes. We immediately recognise, even someone like Thanos, we recognise him as a conflicted anti-hero. And the term, it was coined by Carl Jung, and it's what I think of it is I think it's part of the operating system. It's underlying our minds. It goes with our instincts, our emotions, these sort of automatic, reactions and recognitions that we have as humans. Scientists think that these archetypes actually evolved with us, that they both influenced our DNA and were influenced by our DNA, and they're a set of ideas that we've carried along as humans. So I want to talk about Christian, specifically archetypes, and I heard a guy called Xavier Simons was speaking last year, and he called the same idea exemplars. But what are the Christian archetypes that mean that immediately jump out at you?
The scapegoat.
Yep, that's a good one.
Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, as Christ is a really big archetype though.
Isn't the Messiah also the ultimate archetype? Like the idea of a Messiah?
Yep, the idea of
that's an interesting. So Messiah, I think, means just as Christ means anointed one, right? And an anointing is has a lot of connotations, but one thing it means is to kind of like mark out someone, right? To highlight them as a pointer of something, right? Like, so there's something something to that, maybe in a couple different ways.
So-
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, is this sort of like the idea of maybe big ideas that you find in like every major Christian denomination or branch?
Yeah, absolutely. They're the kind of the images that give you a pattern of behaviour that we see. Like a lot of us identify with creativity, and we see that as an echo of God the Creator, or God the Simulator, as we might use to try to reach out to other futurists and the popular discourse. Things like the concept of the Logos, who is Jesus, but is seen as God's creative self-expression. The suffering servant we're all familiar with, the archetype of the Good Shepherd, the wise and loving father, and the story of the prodigal child, the Madonna and Child, where we see that repeatedly, especially in Baroque art. The repentant sinner, I mean, there's an archetype that if we're serious about our faith, we have to take on routinely. The power of resurrection and forgiveness. I mean, these are important sort of ideas that we live with, and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. And I think, as I said recently in another talk, these are things that we will always recognise in Christianity, even if the systematic theology varies massively, whether it can be Trinitarian or non-Trinitarian. It can be a whole range of theological errors, and we've got that in our organisation, a wide range of theological positions, and but even though the theology differs, the archetypes are very much the same. So we can always recognise these archetypes across all versions of systematic theology. If Neil and I have a bit of Calvinist Arminian sparring from time to time, for instance, but we both agree exactly with the same. So one of us is in error, or we've both got an incomplete picture, but that's how you can be sure that one of you is wrong, and those sorts of. But we've still got the same archetypes that we're living by.
The only thing that I'm certain of is that we're all wrong to some extent.
That's a great view to take into the world, Lincoln, because it gives you a good dose of humility to start your day off with. I wonder how I'm going to be wrong today. I was wrong yesterday, and I'm wrong tomorrow.
And heaven knows I need more humility.
I'll work towards being less wrong if I can, and that's, I guess, what is the goal of our lives? What is God's call and God's vocation for us? And I mean, that's a good general response there, that sort of conformance. But sometimes, though, the archetype that you're selecting has to be a bit different on the day, if you know what I mean. We see a lot of different models of behaviour in our scriptures and in our traditions, and sometimes you've got to pick a particular one. Some days you've got to be the wise leader and the wise ruler. Some days you've got to be the suffering servant. Some days you've got to be the good shepherd. Some days it's quite appropriate to say, look, I really stuffed this up and I'm sorry. And some days you've got to be that patient teacher when everyone is talking rubbish on social media and you're just trying to. I've been experimenting as an anti-troll on Twitter. I don't know how it's going, but the anti-troll statements do not get retweeted. I can tell you that now.
That's right. Yeah,
so someone says something outlandish, and I try and sort of do something nuanced and call them back from the edge of the cliff, and that never gets a retweet.
Provocation is always retweeted. Anti-provocation is not.
Yeah, I've got very good statistics on that now. But so sometimes you've got to be that kind of patient teacher, and so
Jonathan,
I guess
well, that just made me think of you mentioned the like wise and loving father. There's also the parable of the prodigal son. There is both the prodigal son and the older brother in that story, right? And those are things that I think many Christians find themselves on both sides of that, right?
Absolutely. We do every day.
Yeah. And so that is an interesting aspect of the story, is like there's not just kind of one hero necessarily. You have to be able to locate yourself all through it.
That's right, and everybody is a mixture of hero and villain to some extent, and this is where we've got to, I guess, or where I find it helpful to see those reflections in the behaviour in the very rich culture that we have, and the rich background of art and religion and interaction with the divine as we understand it. And so you can't always behave exactly the same in every circumstance. I mean, the Scripture says, be angry but do not sin. So sometimes it's appropriate to be angry, but you've got to be really careful with that. So what archetypes of the positive use of anger, what archetypes of the positive use of guilt in yourself do you have? So I think these sorts of patterns of behaviour are central to our goals in life. All right, contemplation. What does contemplation mean to people? Has anyone done that sort of spiritual practice themselves, or anything sort of like it?
I've practiced the Jesus prayer from Orthodox Christianity, so that's kind of what I think of it as.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. I'll have to Google that.
It's kind of a Christian mantra. It's Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. You just repeat it over and over again to yourself. Yeah,
that's, and there's a lot of our Catholic friends have a lot of similar practices to that, and I'm from an Anglican tradition, and so I can recite everything in the prayer book without it being there, because I've been doing it for a lot of years. So those sorts of things are really useful to focus. It's a spiritual discipline. Yeah.
Can I raise a question comment about that? Michael, are you familiar with I can't even pronounce this, Hesychism controversy?
Oh yeah, the navel gazing in Russian monasticism, essentially. I think that's what the word means, hesychasm or something.
Well, so I know that the meditation tradition you're talking about, at least the extreme or version of it, which does involve sorts of prostration and navel gazing and so forth. That's one of the interesting things that drove some pretty significant doctrinal development in the Orthodox Church.
I wasn't aware of that.
And the controversy between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, because the Catholics, visiting Catholics came in and they said, "What are you guys doing? This can't be right." And so they developed a lot of theology around it, which is very interesting theology, I think.
Oh.
Anyway, sorry, that's a pet project of mine. I'll have to talk about that sometime later, Jonathan. Sorry.
We don't want to get Micah started about the errors in the Nicene Creed and the Filioque controversy. No.
That's right.
You're all going to have to Google that, I think.
All
right. So what's the difference between contemplation and meditation? What do you see as the differences there? Because meditation's quite there's a lot of that in the popular culture now. I tried it. I did 2 or 3 in preparation for this talk.
Contemplation, to a certain extent, it seems, and this is just going by feel, but contemplation kind of denotes more of bringing up the idea, where meditation to me feels more like chewing on the idea, like thought by contemplation, the idea of just being able to like quickly contemplate something and have it spark, whereas meditation is like ruminating. Maybe.
Well, I think of meditation. I use the Samaras Waking Up app, and kind of the perspective is that you're kind of like fasting from thinking. Like you're developing the reflex to notice thoughts arising, sensations arising, so that you are you no longer react to them, and so they no longer kind of take over to achieve eventually this kind of state of like Zen, right? Because once you notice something happening in your mind, it starts to unravel. Whereas when I think of contemplation, based on kind of how you describe it, it's like, no, you have like a object in mind. You're redirecting your attention somewhere else, as opposed to trying to like stop paying attention altogether.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, a lot of meditation is about calming your own mind, as you said, Lorenzo, fasting from thinking most, and creating some more healthy neural patterns. And so, in an age of distraction, that's a really good thing. And contemplation is something different. Contemplation is very much other focused. It's trying to sort of really fill your head with particular images, where it says things like, whatever is good, true, and beautiful, think on these things. That's an instruction to contemplate. So yeah, I think there's room for both of them. I think personally, and I'm finding contemplation probably more useful than meditation in some things. Some of the guided meditations that I listen to are a little bit, some are a little bit kind of self-focused and too self-focused. So there's healthy self-focus in my view, and then there's sort of some unhealthy self-focus where what you're really doing is managing how you're feeling instead of actually reforming and improving yourself. So we've got to ask, these are both effective technologies, which can do more for you, or they can do different things. So it's worth thinking about them in complementary and and different terminologies. I mean, we all heard the whole WWJD craze from years ago, and there was a book on it which I read and everybody got into, and it was a fascinating book where the people went through some really tough moral conundrums and made good choices. But to me, that was good because you were thinking about it, but it was more cerebral. It didn't have the level of feeling and emotions that you can get, and the kind of non-verbals that come with the recognition of archetypes. And here's another verse that I guess we've all seen. It's using the word meditate, but it's really contemplate because it's specifically other focused. And we've also got a verse that many of us have seen, Romans 12:3, I think. I didn't write the scripture down, but anyway, I think that's what it is. And another saying, as a person thinks, so they are. So if you focus on the kind of person and that you want to become, that's very helpful. And I had to put this in for Mark because how many videos has he put up there telling everyone that they're a precious treasure? So that's an archetypal thought from Mark. All right, I guess to be
countless videos.
Yeah. So anyway, this guy was an archetype from my childhood. I'm showing my age by saying that's the only real Doctor Who, with a possible exception of Matt Smith. And I actually, thinking about the Doctor, I almost, as a young person, took some of his personality on. And this is, I was quite shocked to realise this, and I only realised it a few years ago. When the series was rebooted, I realised that I'd actually picked up certain patterns of behaviour from the Doctor. He's a fascinating guy. He does all this sort of stuff. He never shies away from a fight. He gets in front of everything. He always knows he can trip people up who are a lot more powerful. Always flying by the seat of his pants. Like he made it through the Gallifrey Academy by 51% at the second attempt. And he didn't like fossil fuels, which I thought, well, that's a bad idea, and that I guess sparked a lifelong interest in different fuel technology. And at that time, we were all being told, this was the 70s, and we were all told we were going to be out of fossil fuel by 1990. So that That was a useful thing, I guess.
Oops. And then along came fracking, and suddenly we made all the oil we needed.
Well, we've still got to get away from it. It's still a nuisance. So yeah, we do actually have 100 years supply at pre-COVID consumption levels that we know of, but that's still the wrong thing to use.
Hopefully that'll give us enough time to switch to the sun.
Yep. Well, and Australia's leading the world again. We built the world's largest battery. Now we're building one 10 times the size. So, yeah. All right. So contemplation is, to me, is to look at the world through the eyes of an archetype. WWJD is a useful but probably cerebral alternative. There's a bit more sort of logic and I guess analysis involved in that.
Why would you, like, how would you distinguish that? Like, what is it that allows you to see through the eyes of Doctor Who, but not like just saying WWJD doesn't do that? Like, what is the key difference there?
I'm trying to find how to express it. There's some non-verbal things there, right? Not all communication is verbal. Not all thought is verbal. A lot of thought is subverbal.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's possibly a fault in the Libet experiment, for instance. But yeah.
So maybe when you're saying like, what would Jesus do? You're essentially collapsing Jesus to a character we're viewing from the outside, and we're watching his actions. We're not really thinking about the way he actually thinks about problems or something like that.
Yeah, I'd see it as more a kind of a logical analysis rather than a feeling.
Quick interjection. Why I like this group so much is because I hear someone in one sentence say, collapsing Jesus. Thank you, Michael, for that. I really appreciate that.
Don't quote me on that.
Like of the Jesus collapser. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, other things. I mean, I guess coming out of Mike's book, and how do you take on that archetype? How do you think about that unity, that wholeness? So to me, that's what contemplation is. I'm probably not as good as it at all. I probably rate myself at something I've been trying for a long time. I probably started as a young person, sitting up behind the altar in church as a server, and I guess I probably discovered it at that point, but haven't really practiced it. I remember I was in a church in Newcastle in the 90s, and we had little kids at that stage, and I was on a pretty stressful project, and I went to music practice at this church one day, and I realised that the only time that I didn't multitask was when I was in music practice, when I was absolutely focused on learning a song and playing. And we were learning a new song one day, and I said, "Do you know what? That's the first time in as long as I can remember that I've been totally focused and totally in flow, as it's called." And I realised at that point that I had to do something with my head, because it was just I was just too confused, and so I started working on various things at that point. All right, so my next question, I guess what I was trying to link through here is to sustainable spirituality. And boy, there's a few different takes on this, but I want to try and draw them together. So what is sustainable spirituality? When you hear that, what would you think, or what comes to mind when you hear that?
Sounds vaguely environmental, but that's probably way off.
They might be later down the track, but yeah.
Oh.
I mean that's certainly that's an immediate reaction. I guess we do have to be very aware that what we're doing can't continue in the manner that it is, and that's agreed across the political spectrum. But,
Jonathan, I think something I feel like you actually kind of highlighted this term to me a number of years ago, but thinking about eternity or immortality as infinitely sustainable life, right? And I think that's a really profound concept for me, a really good way to like kind of sum it up, which I think sometimes the implications of sustainable for many people that get added on this are an idea of limits, right? But in fact, to talk about something like infinitely sustainable life is the opposite of that. It's in fact that maybe the truest meaning of sustainable is to be able to sustain something without limits, right? To ultimately like be able to be unlimited. So that's I don't know if that's how you think about that term or whatever, but that's kind of how it strikes me.
Yeah, something that got me thinking on this topic some years ago was and Christians are the ones who are actually set up in our whole background for how are we going to live forever, and in what form. And a lot of that is like what's going on in your head that makes you want to hang around that long. You know?
Mm-hmm.
For someone like Jethro Knights, for instance, I'm not sure that you'd even want to live in that head, you know, for the battles he gets into and the egoism and various other things. You know, got to say what's a spirituality that you can live with for a long period. We've gone from having short and desperate lives, and a life expectancy 100 years ago was 40 or 50. So our lifespans are extending. There's prospect of extending it further. But what sort of spirituality, what sort of character is going to make that kind of life worthwhile? This is the question I'm asking. And based on a belief that time and causality, as we know them, are features of this simulation or creation that we're living in. And based on the fact that consciousness, we've got a hard problem with no meaningful scientific answer so far. But we can modify the consciousness that we have. We can change. We can focus on archetypes and change. And there's this whole nature-nurture debate. But basically, since the late 90s and 2000, it's quite clear that that there's a balance between nature and nurture. That the blank state hypothesis has been disproved, but equally that we're not totally deterministic either. So there's a balance there. So we know that we can modify the consciousness that we have. So what are we doing to make that consciousness suitable for the longer term? And I guess the fact that the nature-nurture debate has sort of reached this kind of equilibrium that is neither blank slate nor deterministic is a real challenge, for us to now say, right, what techniques, what technologies will optimize it for the long term.
I know this is something that Neil has given some thought to, since he set out I think, what was that, a 200-year reunion, something like that?
Yeah.
It's my 200th birthday party.
Oh yeah, 200th birthday party.
G'day, Neil. Yeah.
It's so on Mars or the moon, one of the two.
What's your answer to this? Like, how are you gonna still be having fun, at 200 years old?
I don't know. You want to really ask a guy whose last name is Locke about the tabula rasa, and who happens to be a Calvinist too. So, I guess I cover both ends of that spectrum. Um, but yeah, well, what's the question? What is the question?
Well, yeah, just on the idea of this sort of sustainable spirituality and what sort of mental processes, spiritual processes worth preserving will make you feel that your life is worth preserving, other than sort of sheer selfish living. And I want to stay alive and conscious just because I'm selfish about it.
I mean, I don't know that I know the answer to that question any more than I could have answered that question when I was 18 years old about living a full human lifespan of, 100 years. I didn't have a conception of that would have made any sense when I was 18, and yet I didn't engage in I guess as much destructive activity as some of my peers did, because I had a sense that I do want to experience what life has to offer. And so I almost feel like, as people who are accustomed to living no more than 70 to 100 years, I'm not even sure we can conceive of how to plan for or anticipate what a lifetime of 200 or 2,000 years would look like, or what our interests or what our spirituality would even be at that point. But I can say that since I was 18 and now at 45, I still have a desire to experience more and to keep on being who I am in some way. And so I'm not sure I have a good answer to that question, other than I'm interested,
Yeah. Well, I do think this is foundational, though, to kind of a mental health issue, because a lot of people are confused about the whole nature-nurture thing and the whole tabula rasa thing versus determinism. And it seems that the best evidence we have is that it's a mix of the two, and that we're not totally deterministic and we're not totally blank slate. But these archetypes that we've had are manifesting in our personality in particular ways, and particular patterns of thought are consistent. Jonathan Haidt believes that it's genetically determined whether you're more likely to be conservative or more likely to be progressive. It doesn't make that certain, but it means you're probably more inclined to be one way or the other. So we know that we've got a mixture of nature and nurture issues, and we know that we can work on it. And I think if you wake up in the morning and decide, I'm going to work on this, then you know that you're going to have success. So we
there
don't.
Again, what do you do with those people who were liberal at a young age and then became consistently more conservative in their older age? How do you predict them? Or is it? I mean, I think there's just more of a progression. It's determinism, or actually free will or determinism, however you want to put it, tabula rasa, whatever else. Even if you say it's not one or the other, it's a fixed point somewhere in the middle. My question is, what if it's not a fixed point? What if it's a moving, ever-changing point? What if sometimes things shift more in the direction of determinism, or for some people more in the direction of determinism, or along the course of a life away from determinism?
Yeah. People do change as they age. I mean, one of the theories is that if you're confronted with a problem, you're likely to solve it in one of two ways: either idealism or experience. So I was confronted with SARS-CoV-2, and I said, okay, SARS-CoV-1, we did masks, we did hygiene, we did this, we did that. And I just immediately went for experience. Or other people can approach a problem and immediately go for idealism and a vision and a great idea. And then other people will come back with and say, no, experience is more important than the wild-eyed ideas that you have, right? So that in itself, whether your automatic reaction is to go to experience or to go to idealism, I think is part of the ingrained difference between conservative and progressive. And so as you get old, you get more experience, so you get more conservative. I'd love someone in Jonathan Haidt's department to go and test that hypothesis in detail and produce some data behind it. But just those are mental processes that I observe. Yeah. But yeah, this is what I'm thinking. So Galatians 5:22. I hope you've all memorised it. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, humility, self-control. These, against such things there is no law, right? So that's part of the fruit of the indwelling Holy Spirit. That's something we can contemplate or meditate, but the word meditate's acquired some different meanings lately. So maybe contemplation is more appropriate, or the psalmist version of meditation where he says on his law he meditates day and night. Those are that's what it is. So eventually we're going to end up living on. I know you want to do your party on Mars, Neil, but there's no certainty
I would
that at that
totally
point,
go
Mars won't
for
be-
a space station.
an O'Neill cylinder is the word you're looking for.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Yes.
You can
How
Google
could I
that one.
You
forget
have the
that?
culture novels there for a second.
Yeah. You know, in a space like this, if that was your environment, what do you think's going on in those places? What sort of conflict is there? What are the conflicts? What are their challenges? How are they addressing them? How have the humans been improving and modifying themselves? What technology have they used? How have they changed their spirituality? In a place like this, there's no waste, right? You're not digging holes and burying your rubbish, right? Because you can't dig a hole in there.
You're also not shooting large explosives,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
These kinds of things.
You mentioned though, you know what kind of spirituality they might have. What that makes me think of is rather that people might actually be forced to become more spiritual then, because I think about, like, really, you look at the history of any sort of mystical contemplative tradition, they all start off with this insight that, like, you know, you get all of your major problems in your life taken care of, you know, everything's going great, but there's still like this discomfort and dissatisfaction. And so I think you've got eternal life or something effectively close to that. You're going to be thrown up to that like very quickly at some point, and then your attention is going to have to start to be directed in that way. So I would see it as becoming actually more spiritual over time.
Yep. That's good. I mean, one of the things about humans is we've got this kind of inbuilt dissatisfaction, and that drives us forward, and that's both a healthy and an unhealthy thing. When it gets, we always accept the status quo as a given, and then we're looking for something above that, something beyond that. And that sort of dissatisfaction is what drives us to to say, no, I want my own toilet inside my own house, right? And I don't want a long drop one. I want it's that sort of continual technological improvement. We say, here's the basics. How do I improve it? So part of that's healthy, and part of that can lead to greed. Right?
Which is a spirituality, right? I mean, I don't like this idea that spirituality is an unquestioned positive. If spirit is ethos, then becoming a more spiritual person can be a positive thing, but there are types of spirituality as well that I think can look entirely different. I mean, greed, a spirituality of greed, a self-spirituality or a selfish spirituality is another possibility. And that's fascinating to me, because if you project divergent spiritualities out on a 1,000 or million-year timeline, an eternal timeline, then eventually you wind up with something resembling heaven and hell, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's what C.S. Lewis was saying, wasn't he? That the direction that you're going in when you extrapolate that leads to either, and that's an argument that hell is real, because hell is just the extrapolation of the direction you're currently going.
There's something to that that C.S. Lewis, is highlighting, where it's not necessarily impossible to turn around and go back, but the effort required gets harder and harder, right? The farther you go. And so if you're going in this direction, somebody else is going in the other direction, the effort required to reunite is going to get like dramatically harder over time, right? And I think this does suggest that some of the things that we're discussing and highlighting, Neil's saying, like putting on a 1,000-year timeline or whatever, really do kind of elevate that risk consideration in a way that might seem kind of ancient almost, right? Like there are some real risks here. We should be careful about going down the wrong path for too long.
That's right. And that's what your sustainability is. To pick up your point, Neil. Yeah, Darth Vader was a highly spiritual and religious individual. Yep. Spirituality is not necessarily an unbridled good, but what's a sustainable one?
I prefer to think of myself as religious but not spiritual.
Yeah. All right. And you don't have any choice in the matter. Okay. Actions. So these are my suggested actions. You can take it or leave it. But firstly, just think about what are the archetypes of behaviour that are relevant to me in whatever season of life you're living in. Your vision, your own future. What are you becoming? In which direction are you extrapolating? What sort of archetypes could I model my future on? The dark side or not? So if once you decide on those, you can then do pick something that that's useful to you tomorrow. You've got conflict with your kids, think about being the wise and loving father. If you've got conflict with your boss, think about being the suffering servant. Maybe, I don't know. So what are the key things, the challenges that are facing you, and what's the best kind of behavioural model for that? Find a time. I ride my bike to work, which is great. I love that, and it's always in between yelling at drivers to get off Facebook. I find time to to think and to push a whole lot of problems through my head. It's time that can be used really well. Yeah, be a bit non-verbal with it. I think there's a great skill in being able to think without words. And don't be afraid to tell people. Do you meditate? Yeah, I meditate, but I do contemplation as well. That's even better. Have you tried that? Oh, what are you contemplating? Oh, that's interesting. And then, as St. Paul says, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, so that you will know what is the hope of his calling, the riches of the glorious inheritance. Saints. Where does that come from? That comes from the archetypes. That comes from the extrapolation of the direction that your spirituality is heading. All right.
I like this, Jonathan. I think it's interesting to think about, the distinctive kind of spiritual practices here. And yeah, I think you're right. Like meditation is hugely popular in the sense of, as Lorenzo was saying, like fasting from thought, right? But there's this whole other arena kind of contemplative practices and so forth to explore. And that seems valuable to me.
Yeah, I guess those of us who've had the benefit of exposure to a contemplative tradition have probably got an unfair advantage, but you can start any time, any day.
Sorry to jump in late tonight, but what I got to experience was good.
Oh well, you can catch the rest of it up on YouTube, Neil.
Recording and posting?
Yeah.
Yep.
We'll
Great.
put this up. Yeah, thanks for coming. Jonathan, something else I was thinking about. You're talking about the cerebral quality of WWJD versus, some of these other kind of contemplative approaches or something. And I feel like that actually, like the Lord's Prayer is, although it doesn't seem to be contemplating something, it's actually implicitly centering you in a certain world, right? So it's our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. It has this up to down movement, and then out, right? And so it locates us in the world. It talks about like our trajectory forward based on having looked upward. We look up, and then here's our trajectory, and we don't want to go off in that ditch or this ditch. We want to go, to be guided on the path, and that puts us in a world, I think, a kind of virtual reality sort of, where we're actually contemplating that relationship to things, right? And where we should be in that equation. And so that strikes me as something interesting. And maybe there's something to this. Maybe there's a reason why these prayers are popular after 2,000 years or something like that.
They've survived because they're effective. Yeah, very, very Darwinian view of things. Yeah.
Okay, guys.
Okay.
If what is it? All things go through, go back to God. If Jesus is in all things and my possible options, my particular Jesus option is going to collapse to me going to sleep. That is the collapse of Jesus for me. Love you guys.
Okay.
You guys take it easy.
See you, Mark.
Likewise.
All right.
Take it easy, mate.
Night,
See you
Mark.
soon.
Good night.
All right. Look, thanks for that. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you, Jonathan.
I hope you found it useful. Happy to have any further correspondence. Anyone wants to contact me, you can find me on Facebook or find me kicking around the internet somewhere.
Anti-kicking.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh well. It's
Everybody
it doesn't work.
sorry to come so late, guys. I had a seminary lecture, which ran way over time as they often do. But a little bit I heard sounded great. So this has been recorded.
Yep,
yeah.
yep. Michael will stick it up on YouTube sometime.
Oh,
in the
wonderful,
future.
wonderful. So I won't have missed out quite as much as I thought I did. And thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for
Yeah.
coming.
Well, I tried.
Yeah. All right. Look, thanks everybody. I got to get ready for a meeting in 5 minutes because I'm still at work. But
Cool.
I've got the unfair advantage that it's I'm only a few hours away from Friday afternoon red wine. So
Enjoy.
great
Have
to
fun,
see you.
Jonathan. Thanks
Later,
so much.
guys.
Take it
Good night
easy.
all. Peace.